Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Murtaza from Oula in cooperation with Kantar. And today we'll have a discussion with one of our senior colleague, Senior Vice President Arfa Syed, and we'll discuss regarding her recent thought piece work that she has done. Assalamu alaikum, Arfa.
Walaikum Assalam. How are you, Mirza?
Superb, superb. I'm just looking forward to the discussion we'll be having regarding your recent work. And I think that's basically based on the core question that is, so do you think there is something undergoing in terms of shift in Pakistan?
Well, I certainly think there is a lot that is changing in Pakistan. And the primary reason behind it is that Pakistan is a country that has a staggering high number of youth. So if you just look at the demographic structure of Pakistan, around 64% of Pakistani consumers are below the age of 30. And when you're young, it automatically means that there's a lot that you can change because you've got the drive, you've got that adaptability, you've got that flexibility. And that is primarily what is leading to changes in different spheres of life within Pakistan.
While talking about the change, and as I've mentioned, the shift, so do you think any specific or most important social and economical shift that you have seen or is emerging and coming into Pakistan?
I would definitely say that there are social changes coming into play and there are economic changes coming into play. But more than that, I think there is a cultural shift, which is the first thing which we need to look at. Pakistan has always been a collectivist country. We've been known for our collectivism. We've been driven by reward of tribe earlier. However, now what we can see is that there's a wave of neo-collectivism that is sort of shaping the society, and we see more and more of individuals sort of weaving and riding onto this wave. And the different manifestations of neo-collectivism can be seen in many spheres. For instance, the rise of nuclear families is one example where you can see neo-collectivism coming into play. More and more women entering the workforce is another example. The democratization of power is another avenue that we can see.
So this term new collectivism, would you like to put some light onto it for our audience?
Of course. So, if when I talk about neo-collectivism, I'm basically referring to the evolutionary change that is coming in Pakistan. So our cultural fabric, if you diagnose it, there were lots and lots of values which were more related to general collectivism. So you could see, for instance, perseverance. You could see the reward of tribe coming in and playing its part. Filial piety is an important component where everybody needs to respect the elders. However, now with the passage of time, you can see lots and lots of individualistic values coming into play. For instance, the urge and the search behind, for meaningfulness in different aspects of life, including religion, is what is a neo-collectivist value.
Okay, so basically the transition, it's a process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a process, it's a transition where we haven't really entered into the individualistic space. However, the journey has somehow started. And there are many factors for it. For instance, the popular culture and the education that we receive as young people celebrates the victories of individualistic cultures. So that sort of can also stem it. And there are multiple other reasons why we're moving towards that dimension. I've covered it in detail in my thought piece.
So has neo-collectivism impacted the expression and articulation for our nation?
Certainly it has. A couple of years ago, we used to prefer communication that was dipped in niceties. We were more symbolic, if I would put it in the right words. We were more careful about what we were communicating. But now, if you just look at the social media, or you even look at how the youth wants to talk about certain issues, it's pretty much like they want to grab the bull by its horns. They want to speak out loud, they want to have an opinion, and they also want to make sure that their opinion is heard. So I certainly feel that this change is stemmed by neo-collectivism.
So as we are talking about shifts and changes, and we cannot skip this pandemic thing that happened. So how this journey of neo-collectivism impacted by COVID?
Well, I think COVID was sort of a catalyst for neo-collectivism because we got this time, we got this opportunity to think. Luckily, Pakistan has not been burdened by disease that much. Our death rates are flattish, if I would put it in a 5-year lens. But what we can clearly see is that there have been economic impacts of COVID, and there have been mental health related impacts of COVID. So COVID has clearly been a trigger for new collectivism. People under the shadow of COVID have done what they would ideally want to do. For instance, COVID marriages is an interesting phenomena in which we sort of gathered in our social listening. People would want to have smaller gatherings. They didn't want to invite so many people and have a huge wedding and then just keep on paying the loans that they'd borrowed. So many people got married in COVID. That's one example.
So this economic constraint, how this has impacted the consumption or the usage in general?
So it's not just triggered by economic pressures, although economic pressures are a huge part of the impact that Pakistan faced by after COVID. But it's not just limited to economy. However, just to answer how economic pressures have changed our consumption and usage patterns, the impact has been huge. So if I just give you an example, Pakistan's GDP actually contracted, and it didn't really contract post COVID hit it. It contracted the first time in 2019, and then in 2020 we hit a negative GDP, which was pretty much a global phenomena. So we've actually been hit economically most by COVID. If I say that COVID has largely impacted our economy, that's the right thing to say. Um, Consumers have responded in a very different way. Currently, the consumer confidence rate index is at its lowest. The consumption in different categories is sort of decreasing. You'll see shrinking pockets. And what all this is resulting into is a very different way in which consumers are buying products and consumers are consuming products. For instance, if I give you an example, the search for value in different categories has sort of just started again. People are redefining the value equations in different categories. And it would be quite safe to say that this is like the era of second best. People are not really looking for the best option. They're actually looking for an option which would give them something near the best, but at a price that they can afford.
And going back to another point is that besides this social and economical shifts, what other emerging trend that or shift or a mega shift do you think is coming into this nation?
Okay, so another thing which is partly triggered by COVID and was always a problem, but was always considered as a taboo in the society, was mental well-being, or basically speaking about mental health. I think with youth coming into play, having more power, having changed their articulation, their expression, more and more young people are now very open to discuss about mental well-being, even talk about mental health issues that they faced. And Pakistan has actually seen a 30% surge. I was reading it in an article that Pakistan has actually seen a 30% rise in anxiety and depression related symptoms post-COVID. Our suicide rates, I mean, they're pretty high. So there is a lot of mental pressure that is partly stemming in from the economic constraints, but then it's also because of the structure in which our society has been there. And also because this youth that is in charge right now and holds around, I think, 46% of the electorate, is very, brought up in a situation where we've been hit by political instability all our lives. We've faced war against terrorism, and there are so many other aspects which have sort of pressurized us. And that's what is very, openly being discussed now. So that's another change which I see.
Okay, superb on highlighting those changes that we are. And now I'll directly jump into the thing that we love the most, and that's about brands. So, how can you believe that right now brands can connect or be meaningful specifically for a consumer in a country which is drastically evolving with a faster pace as it has ever before?
So that's one of my favorite avenues to speak about. There are no two opinions about the power of brand building, and we've seen that coming in brand Z data as well, that stronger brands had a better ability to bounce back post-COVID. When you talk about meaningfulness, there are two main elements which come in meaningfulness. A brand needs to meet the needs of the consumers, and then it needs to have an affinity with the consumers, basically. So when we talk about meeting needs in particular, there are three main types of needs which we meet. So there's a universal need, which is present in all human beings, and then there are some cultural needs which we meet, and then our brand proposition is targeted to meet both these needs. In our case, in Pakistani society, the cultural needs are massively changing. And I think brands that understand these evolving needs, that believe in two-way communication, that believe in constantly looking at their consumers, how their lives are evolving, are tend to respond better than the brands that sort of still follow an old school way of understanding consumers. So if I just cut it short, brands need to understand in order to be understood. And then the second thing is about affinity, which I've already spoken. Brands really need to invest in building affinity. And in a time which is economically crunched, in a situation where there are lots of mental pressures and social changes coming into play, affinity can be built by resonance. If we connect better with the consumer, if we resonate better with the consumer, they will eventually just, sort of build a relationship with us.
So, if you were to define an insight communicating to the audience of Pakistan, so what would it be for a brand?
So, if I would just sum it up, the key to communicate with Pakistani audience at this particular time is to speak with empathy, have an empathetic tone, understand the consumer realities, and then speak with the consumer in a language that they would want to hear, rather than talk about niceties, rather than talk about issues that are not really stereotyped. We need to talk about things, we need to unstereotype. Basically, we need to connect with the youth, be a part of the change that they intend to bring in the society, and then in general as well, be empathetic towards consumers, understand that this is the reality and this is what they're facing, and sharpen the value equation, but not really just take a very, very functional route. Because at this particular point of time, people are looking for emotional bonds. People are looking to create empathetic bonds, not just with each other, but with even the brands that they consume.
So, would you like to mention any example regarding this?
Definitely. I have mentioned a couple of examples in my thought piece, but if I just talk about brands that have actually communicated empathetically, I would talk about Shan, which is one of my favorite examples from their Dr. Bahu campaign, if you look at it. So it's a perfect example of how brands need to communicate at this particular point of time, because, there is an insight which is about a certain percentage of Pakistani doctors who just get educated but never get a chance to come in the workforce and showcase their talents. So it connects at that level. Then there is a resonance which they build up with the audience. They showcase a mother-in-law, they showcase a daughter-in-law, and a very everyday sort of a environment. And then they also have an element of empathy embedded into it, and the brand is playing an active role in the communication. So that's one of my favorite examples.
Thank you so much for sharing such insightful thought piece work that you have done. Thank you so much for your time, Arfa. Thank you so much, audience. Please do write your comments, or if you have any queries on our YouTube channel. Take care. Allah Hafiz.